Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. One of the questions that came up in the last live stream was, why do you think the police didn't release the video? That's the Ring doorbell video of Shanann arriving home earlier. Why didn't they release it at the same time that they released all of the discovery, which was around about November the 19th? Now, I think there's a fairly short and a longer answer to this question. I actually posed the same question on Patreon, and the very first person to answer it nailed it. Stephanie, well done. I'll refer to your answer a little bit later in this episode. Before we get to it, for those who haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. You can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of the screen. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So I think we need to go through about three or four sections when we address this question. That's the long version of it. We need to look at the context. We need to bear in mind it's the final footage that we have of Shanann. It's the very last time that we see her alive. We see what she's wearing. Then also look at the timing of the release of this particular footage. It's a little bit different to the context, the timing, and then we're going to deal with why it makes sense that it was released when it was released. So first of all, the context is that if you remember correctly, the Trinastich video only seemed to emerge also around about the middle of December. I'm not quite sure whether it only emerged then or whether people only sort of picked it up at that point, about a month or so after most of the discovery was provided. But one thing that certainly wasn't provided was this Ring doorbell footage, and as time went by, there was sort of a clamor developing. People wanted to know where it was. There's been all sorts of other information that people have been looking for, but this in particular, people wanted to know, what was going on. There has been also other demands for, well, what about the Ring doorbell footage at the time that Chris Watts was leaving to go to the well site? I don't think any of that footage actually exists. I could be wrong, but I don't think that footage exists, and I think it doesn't exist because Watts either turned off the router or he turned off the security system. It's hard to know for sure. So the context was that on around about the 18th of February 2019, around about 3 months after the sentencing hearing, after the plea deal was sort of accepted, you had the follow-up interrogation at Dodge Correctional, and it was sort of part of the release of that interrogation, right? So in terms of the transcript and also the audio and well, not video. In terms of the audio, the Ring doorbell footage was released around about that time. If you remember correctly, although Chris Watts was interviewed February the 18th, it was quite a few days later that we only got the transcript or the CBI report, right, written by Tammy Lee. I think it was early March that we got it, but we did get a advance sort of preview by Dr. Phil, who basically got the scoop on the whole thing. So before the authorities actually released the information, they released the, as far as I can remember, they'd already released the Ring doorbell footage, and that tended to capture people's imagination. So in lieu of us not knowing what was said right in the beginning, people were studying this Ring doorbell footage, and we looked at the clothing she was wearing, and we suddenly got a very real sense of the peril that Shanann was about to step into. These were possibly the last seconds of her life. I certainly believe that. And when you go to the phone data review, and it takes you right up to the moment of Shanann's murder on August the 13th, you get a sense of the importance the primary importance of this video footage. It refers to this is the last outgoing communication found on Shanann's phone, where at 01:25 she told Cassie that they'd landed, and then at 01:48 Watts' phone logged the Vivint alert of Shanann's entry into their home. And then it says in the phone data review, at that same moment the Vivint video monitor captured Shanann as she walked up to the home and entered. Nicole Atkinson was captured backing out of the driveway. And then interestingly it says between 01:48 and 04:23 there was no movement detected on the main floor. And I've also been asked about that, and my answer to that is the same as why is there no footage of what Watts was doing when he was loading the truck between around about 18 minutes past 5 and 5:45 that morning. Why do we see so much from the Vivint camera, but he's actually on the Ring doorbell side, but we don't see anything? What's the same thing? It was disabled, and he would know that he needed to disable it. He would know that he wouldn't want to be seen from that side. Of course, he couldn't do much about what was going on the Trinastich side. And so the fact that Shanann's phone activity is dormant the entire time, I think clearly shows that she died quite early on. What I mean is there's no activity on her phone. She arrives home and then that's the last activity on her phone. Her phone is dormant until 20 to 8 when Watts sent the device a staged message, pretending not to know where she was at. And the fact that he was staging at this early point shows that is what was going to likely be going on, that there was going to be staging to her phone, possibly also on her Facebook, who knows. So that is the context. I think the other thing that is very important is that this, as I say, was the final footage of Shanann, and so it's important because of the clothing that she's wearing. It's the very last time we see her. We see also that she's carrying a black suitcase. We know where that ended up. We look at the footwear that she was wearing. We know she left that at the door. We know that she was carrying a handbag, and she also had her phone in her left hand. Now, I remember when it came out, and what I'm doing now is speculating. I don't think it's very good to do, but I'm just sharing what I thought at the time. I was also wondering, why has this been held back? If you are going to release it anyway, why didn't you release it in the beginning? And then I wondered whether the timing of the release of the video, remember it was actually released before the transcript sort of came out. And bear in mind the transcript was quite controversial because according to the transcript the children were still alive, and there was the whole daddy no and everything going on at the well site, which was pretty horrifying. And I kind of got the sense that the district attorney wanted to almost drown that out via releasing this video footage. And what I mean is, if you think about it, what the district attorney had said during the sentencing hearing was their assessment, their best assessment of what had really happened during the night and early the next morning, and what Watts had then said at the prison seemed to contradict quite a lot of it. And so instead of having this explicitly contradicted and perhaps having egg on his face, this video would sort of distract from that. People would all be focusing on the video and not necessarily paying that much attention to this extraordinary second confession by Chris Watts. And so that was part of what I thought might be the reason. I've got to say now that I'm not sure that is true. It might be part of the reason. It might have played a little part in the reasoning behind it. But what is, I think, more likely is if you go to Discovery page 1979, it's a report that is dated November 14th, 2018. So this was going on past the plea deal right up to 5 days before the sentencing hearing, right? And this was authored by Detective Baumhoven, and what he says is, quote, I observed via a doorbell camera recording Shanann walk from the street to her front door at 01:48 hours on Monday, the 13th of August. Shanann was carrying her suitcase in one hand and her phone in the other and walked steadily the entire time. Based on my training and experience, Shanann did not appear to be intoxicated, which would have been apparent based on her minimal drinking history. And then it goes on to talk about the Vivint security system reported a living room motion sensor activation, but then nothing further. Now, so what is quite important there is what the detective is highlighting is he's not talking about what she's wearing. He's not talking about Nicole driving off in the background. He's simply describing the way that she's walking, using the word steadily the entire time. Is making the case that you can clearly see that Shanann isn't intoxicated by the way that she's moving, right? And Chris Watts probably had a potential defense if he had lawyers at his disposal, and if he was thinking about defending himself, this probably would have been a way to go. I'm not saying that there's any substance to it, but there was certainly a little bit of doubt in this particular area. And of course, as soon as you make the claim for intoxication, you can make the leap that Shanann perhaps was reckless as a parent, and she was endangering, because she was pregnant, she was endangering the unborn child. And if that was the case, wouldn't she be doing the same to her own children? As I say, I'm not saying that I believe that. I don't believe that. But that could have been a defense case had Chris Watts been trying to think of anything that he could use to his advantage. But apparently he wasn't even thinking about that. But the prosecution were wary. And so what they were doing is they were keeping this very close to their chest, just in case Chris Watts did have a change of heart or a change of mind. And so from Shanann's perspective, from the prosecution's perspective, this was actually her best defense evidence, Shanann's best defense against the allegation that she was intoxicated was walking steadily up to the front door and just seeming to be awake, sober, and absolutely, just looked normal. And so this brings us to the comment left by Stephanie on Patreon that I just posed a question, just curious to see what people would say. And it really comes down to the blood alcohol content in Shanann's blood that was a little bit of a source of concern. And to such an extent that Detective Bormover was investigating it until as late as 5 days before the sentencing hearing. And so you can imagine also because of that, because they were investigating it just up until the sentencing hearing, that possibly they were still examining that video evidence, and so they didn't include it. It could be that, or that they felt, well, if this is Chris Watts' best shot at putting the blame on Shanann, let's keep this to one side. There may even have been a legal imperative, meaning, if this was going to be evidence led before a jury, you don't want to contaminate a jury with them seeing this footage before it is entered at trial and then making up their minds based on speculation in the media and in the public. Does that make sense? Anyway, so this is Stephanie's response, and it's basically the short answer to why the Ring doorbell footage was withheld initially. This is what Stephanie wrote. I think the prosecution was holding their cards close. If the case went to trial, they would have shown the video to counter the defense's accusation that Shanann's blood alcohol content was high because she was drunk. The footage does not show an intoxicated, unsteady woman, rather a pregnant, likely tired woman, steady on her feet with her hands full, purse, luggage, phone, walking up to the front door. I think the video came out after the speculation of the public that Shanann's high blood alcohol content in the autopsy was because of alcohol consumption and not natural decomposition. And that's the end of the quoted area. Now, I do remember studying up on this myself independently and also looking at some of the statements made by Shanann's friends about her drinking habits. So, first of all, Cassie Rosenberg said something along the lines that she'd known Shanann for more than 2 years and had never seen Shanann drunk or even slightly intoxicated. And I've got to say, my response to that, my initial kind of gut reaction was, that seems a bit of an exaggeration. I mean, how many people can you say that about, that you've never seen someone even slightly intoxicated? It seemed to be about a friend rallying to the cause of another friend. Then Christina Meacham was also asked, and she said she did see Shanann have a few alcoholic drinks on trips, but classified Shanann's alcoholic consumption as very minimal and only social drinking. Now, I found that more of a reasonable thing to say, because it's not the end of the world if you have a couple of drinks. And then Christina Meacham also said she has never seen Shanann drunk or even mildly intoxicated. And I've got to say, from what Christina said here, I tended to believe that and accept that, as well as what an expert friend of mine that ran the test on the blood alcohol content, and that sort of settled it as far as I was concerned. One thing that I think does raise a very interesting question is if you say that it is true that Shanann was never drunk. Why do you think that is? That's my question to you. If Shanann was never drunk, which is a little bit unusual, some people get drunk every now and then. If you think about Donald Trump, for example, Donald Trump, as far as I know, also avoids alcohol. I don't think he ever drinks. Why do you think, if Shanann was never drunk, why do you think that might have been? All right, I'm not going to take it further than that. In the next episode on Chris Watts, I'm going to deal with another question. How do we know when Chris Watts threw the book Hold Me Tight into the bin? That was another question that came up, I think, during a previous live or previous video. If you're interested in following the answers to these questions, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the notifications bell. And I'll see you guys next time.